All right, let's dive into this week's deep dive. And we've got a really interesting mix of stuff.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to be talking cars.
Yeah, it seems like our listeners really interested in automotive care and safety. I see historical stuff in here, tire construction, even workshop safety from OSHA.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Looks like they want to be pretty well informed.
yeah, they want to make sure they're doing things right. So let's jump right in. When we talk about cars, I mean, it's easy to forget all the history behind it, right? Like, how did we even get from no cars to cars needing mechanics?
Yeah, it's a long history, and it all really begins with Carl Benz
Okay,
back
great.
in 1885 in Germany. He's the one that's credited with, designing the first automobile.
Okay.
But there's actually a really interesting story about his wife, Bertha.
Oh, I love stories about the unsung heroes and the people behind the scenes. Tell me about Bertha.
Yeah, so in 1888, she took her husband's invention on an 80-kilometer road trip.
Wow.
And it wasn't just like a joyride,
Yeah.
It was a big deal. It proved that automobiles could actually be practical.
Right.
And it showcased all those early advancements, internal combustion engines and, well, the need for mechanics.
Yeah, because I'm sure things were breaking down left and right back then.
Exactly. I mean, even today,
Yeah.
it's amazing to think how far we've come, from those early models to these incredibly complex vehicles we have now.
Yeah. And the role of the mechanic has obviously had to evolve along with all of that technology.
Absolutely. I'm actually looking at one of the sources here,
Yeah.
and it talks about the licensing process for automotive technicians in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And it's run by the Junta Examinadora de Técnicos Automotrices.
It's pretty serious.
Yeah, and you can tell they really take professional standards seriously in the industry.
It makes you realize just how much responsibility these mechanics have, right? I mean, we're talking about people's lives when you're working on brakes or steering systems.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, one of the sources even compares it to being an airplane mechanic, where they have to get certified every year
Right.
because the stakes are so high. One mistake and, well, something terrible could happen.
Yeah, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah, so it's not just about knowing how to fix a car, but really having a strong work ethic and a dedication to keep learning and improving your skills.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about caring about the work you do and realizing that it impacts people's lives.
Right.
And I guess speaking of safety, let's talk about the workshop environment itself, right?
Right.
Because even just being in a workshop, there are a lot of hazards.
Oh, yeah, you got to be careful.
I mean, our listener even provided some OSHA guidelines, so clearly they're thinking about that, the importance of workplace safety.
Yeah, that's smart. And even if you're not in the U.S., these principles are universal, right? I mean, sprains, cuts, burns,
Right.
those are common in workshops anywhere.
Yeah, and the descriptions in these OSHA guidelines, they don't sugarcoat it either.
No, they don't. Especially the chemical burns kind of makes you cringe.
Yeah, it makes you realize how important it is to take precautions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk about fire hazards. We've got a whole section here on different classes of fires, but in a typical workshop, what are the ones we should really be worried about?
You're most likely to encounter Class A and Class B fires.
Okay, so A and B. What's the difference again?
So Class A is your everyday combustibles,
Right.
like wood and paper,
Okay, stuff you'd find.
and the Class B is your flammable liquids,
Yeah, right.
gasoline, oil, stuff that's, well, unfortunately kind of common in workshops.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we need to be prepared for both of those. What's the best way to handle them if a fire does break out?
Fire extinguishers are a must-have, obviously, but it's
Yeah.
not just about having them. You got to know how to use them.
Right, right. In the heat of the moment, you don't want to be fumbling around.
Exactly. There's a good acronym to remember. PASS,
Pass.
pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the lever, and sweep from side to side.
Okay, pass. I like it. Easy to remember.
Yeah. But the best strategy is, of course, prevention.
Right, of course.
Regular fire safety training, being aware of the hazards, knowing how to handle flammable materials.
Yeah, and I imagine just keeping a clean and organized workspace helps a lot too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Less clutter, less fuel for the fire.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got fire safety covered. What about ventilation? The sources mention that quite a bit. Why is that so important, especially in a garage environment?
Ventilation is key for getting rid of fumes and dust.
Okay.
And one of the big things to watch out for is asbestos dust.
Oh, yeah, asbestos.
It's found in brake and clutch components, and it's a known carcinogen.
Right, definitely don't want to be breathing that in.
Yeah, and it's not just for professional mechanics either.
Right, anyone working on their car needs to be aware of that.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
good ventilation and, proper masks are essential.
Yeah, safety first. So we've talked about all these things we can do to prevent accidents, but let's face it, things happen. What happens if, even with all the precautions, there is an accident?
Well, that's where having some first aid knowledge comes in handy.
Right. Our sources actually distinguish between emergencies and urgencies. What's the difference there?
So an emergency is something that needs, immediate medical attention.
Right.
Heavy bleeding, someone's having trouble breathing, loss of consciousness. An
Thank-
urgency is less severe, but it still needs to be addressed.
Right. So like a deep cut versus a minor sprain or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we need to be able to assess the situation and know when to call for help. And speaking of emergencies, one of the most important first aid skills is CPR, right?
Absolutely. Knowing CPR can literally save someone's life.
Yeah, and one of the sources even provided a link to a YouTube video for further learning.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think I'll be checking that out myself, just in case.
Yeah, it's good to know, even if you're not a mechanic.
So the key is to know the basics, be able to stabilize the situation until the professionals arrive. Okay, so we've covered the workshop itself, but now let's get to the heart of the matter. The car.
All right, let's get greasy.
And specifically, the tires.
Ah, yes. Tires. The things we tend to forget about until they go flat.
Yeah, but they're so much more complex than they seem.
Oh, absolutely. They're actually pretty incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally what keeps us connected to the road.
Yeah, and they have to withstand so much heat, friction, weight.
And different road conditions, weather conditions.
Yeah, it's a tough job.
So let's start with the basics. What are tires actually made of?
Okay, so the main ingredient is rubber, but it's not all the same.
Ah, okay. What are the different types of rubber?
There are two main types, natural rubber and synthetic rubber.
Okay, natural and synthetic, what's the difference?
Natural rubber comes from rubber trees.
Okay, so it's the real deal.
Yeah, and it's known for its elasticity and grip, especially on wet surfaces.
That makes sense. So what about synthetic rubber? What's its advantage?
Synthetic rubber is more about durability. It holds up better to heat, aging.
So as cars got faster and more powerful, synthetic rubber became more important.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's about finding the right balance between grip and durability.
Precisely. And tire manufacturers mix these two types of rubber,
Okay.
and they add all sorts of other ingredients to fine-tune the performance.
Mm.
Steel, nylon, rayon, silica, even carbon black.
Wait a minute, carbon black? Didn't we talk about that earlier? Isn't that like soot?
Yep, that's right. It's a byproduct of petroleum combustion.
So soot in my tires, how does that work?
It's actually pretty cool.
Okay.
In tires, carbon black acts as a reinforcing agent. It makes the rubber stronger, more resistant to wear and tear.
Interesting.
And it's also what gives tires their black color.
So it's not just about aesthetics, it actually serves a purpose.
Yeah, pretty neat, huh?
All right, so we've got this mix of natural and synthetic rubber, plus all these other ingredients. How does it all come together to actually form a tire?
It's a pretty involved process, but let's break it down. First, you have the inner liner. That's a thin layer of rubber that prevents air from escaping.
Okay, so that's what keeps the tire inflated.
Right. Then you have multiple layers of fabric called plies. These are like the backbone of the tire. They give it strength and flexibility.
So the plies are what give the tire its shape and structure.
Oh, exactly.
And then the tread goes on top of the plies.
Yeah, the tread is the part that actually touches the road.
Right, the part we see.
And the pattern of the tread that's designed to provide grip, traction, and get rid of water.
I've noticed that different tires have different tread patterns. Is that why?
Yeah, different tread patterns are designed for different conditions. Like, summer tires have shallower grooves
Okay.
because they're meant for dry pavement.
So that's for maximum contact with the road when it's nice and dry.
Exactly. Winter tires, on the other hand, have those deeper grooves and sipes.
Right, those little slits in the tread.
Yeah, those help them grip on snow and ice.
It's like they're digging into the surface.
Exactly. And then there are the steel belts.
Steel belt.
Yeah, they're embedded within the tire, beneath the tread. They provide extra strength, especially at high speeds.
Okay.
They also help prevent punctures.
So it's like they're giving the tire an internal armor.
Yep, pretty much. And then finally, the whole thing goes through a process called vulcanization.
Vulcanization, what's that?
It's a heating process that bonds all the layers together and makes the rubber nice and strong.
So it's like baking a cake.
Kind of.
All right, so we've got all these layers, different materials, and this special heating process.
It's quite a process.
It makes you appreciate how much engineering goes into something as, seemingly simple as a tire.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So speaking of different types of tires, let's dive into that a bit more. We've got summer tires, winter tires, all-season tires. What are the key differences?
Well, we already touched on tread patterns, but the other big difference is the tread compound itself.
Okay, the compound. What does that mean?
So summer tires have a harder compound. That softens up when it gets warm,
Yep.
giving you better grip and handling in dry conditions.
So those are the ones you want when it's hot out.
Yep.
And what about winter tires?
Winter tires have a softer compound
Okay.
that stays flexible even when it's freezing.
Right, so it can grip on snow and ice.
Exactly.
And all-season tires.
All-season tires are kind of in between.
Okay.
They're meant to do okay in most conditions.
So a good compromise if you don't want to switch tires every season.
Yeah, but they're not as good as dedicated winter tires in really harsh conditions.
Right, so it depends on where you live and what kind of driving you do.
Exactly. Now, there's another type of tire that's pretty cool. Run-flat tires.
Run flat tires, those sound interesting.
Yeah, they're designed to let you keep driving even after you get a puncture.
Wait, really? How does that work?
They have these reinforced sidewalls
Okay.
that can support the weight of the car even without air pressure.
So you can keep driving even with a flat tire.
Yeah, for a limited distance, of course.
That's amazing.
It could be a real lifesaver if you get a flat in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, like on a busy highway or something.
Exactly.
But are there any downsides to run flat tires?
Well, they tend to be more expensive,
Okay.
and they can give you a bit of a harsher ride.
Because the sidewalls are so stiff.
Right. And they're not compatible with all vehicles either.
Right, so it's important to do your research before you get them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about different types of tires. Let's move on to maintenance. One of the things that always comes up is tire pressure. How often should you be checking that?
You should be checking your tire pressure at least once a month,
Okay, once a month.
and even more often if the weather's really hot or cold.
Okay. And how do you check it? Just with a tire pressure gauge?
Yep. Tire pressure gauges are easy to use and pretty cheap.
And how do you know what the correct pressure is for your car?
You can usually find it on a sticker inside the driver's side door jamb
Okay.
or in your owner's manual.
All right, so pretty easy to find that information. And why is it so important to have the correct tire pressure?
Well, if your tires are overinflated or underinflated, it can affect your handling, your fuel efficiency, and even how quickly your tires wear out.
So it's about safety, saving money, and making your tires last longer.
Exactly.
What about tire rotation? I know that's something you're supposed to do, but I've never really understood why.
So tire rotation helps make sure that all four of your tires wear down evenly,
Okay.
because the front tires tend to wear down faster than the rear tires.
Oh, I see. Especially on front-wheel drive cars, right?
Right. So by rotating them, you're basically giving each tire a turn at being in different positions.
Makes sense. So how often should you rotate your tires?
Yeah, it depends on the car and the tires, but usually every 5,000 to 8,000 miles is a good rule of thumb.
Okay. And what about that tread wear indicator? What is that, and how does it work?
So the tread wear indicator is a little raised bar in the tread grooves.
Okay.
As the tire wears down, that bar becomes more visible.
I see.
And when the tread is level with the bar, it's time for new tires.
So it's like a built-in warning system?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a simple way to tell if your tires are getting too worn down.
Okay, so we've talked about tire types and maintenance, but what about damage? You know, things happen, you roll over a nail, you hit a pothole. How can you tell if a tire is repairable or if it needs to be replaced?
All right, well, let's talk about some of the common types of tire damage. You've got punctures, cuts, sidewall bulges, tread separation.
Okay, those all sound pretty serious. Let's break those down. What's a puncture?
A puncture is just a small hole, usually from a nail or something sharp,
Right.
and a cut is a bigger tear.
Yeah.
Maybe from hitting a curb or a really bad pothole.
Ouch.
Yeah. Now, a sidewall bulge,
Yeah.
that means the tire structure is weakened, maybe from hitting something hard.
So that one's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it's a big red flag. And then tread separation is when, well, the tread separates from the rest of the tire.
Yikes, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, that was especially bad at high speeds.
Right, it could cause you to lose control.
Exactly.
So with all those different types of damage, how do you know if a tire can be repaired or not?
Our sources actually have a pretty helpful checklist.
Okay, what does it say?
First of all, the damage has to be in the tread area, not the sidewall.
Okay, so sidewall damage is a no-go.
Right. The hole can't be bigger than 6 millimeters,
All right.
and the tire can't have been repaired more than once.
So it's about location, size, and repair history.
Yeah, pretty much.
And if the tire meets those criteria, how do you repair it?
There are two main ways: cold patching and hot patching.
Okay, what's the difference?
A cold patch is a temporary fix.
Right.
It's basically a plug.
Okay.
A hot patch is more permanent. It involves, like, melting a patch onto the tire.
Interesting.
It's kind of like vulcanizing a small area.
It's like a tire surgery.
You could say that.
All right, well, that's a lot to know about tire damage and repair. I'm starting to realize just how complex these things are.
Yeah, there's a lot more to tires than meets the eye.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about tires themselves, but what about the wheels? I've heard terms like wheel alignment and wheel balancing, but I'm not really sure what they mean.
All right, well, let's talk about those.
Yeah, let's dive into the world of wheels.
So wheel alignment is all about making sure your wheels are at the correct angles.
Okay, what does that mean?
They need to be perpendicular to the ground
Okay.
and parallel to each other.
All right, so basically straight and lined up properly.
Exactly.
And why is that important?
Well, if your wheels aren't aligned properly, it can cause all sorts of problems. Your car might pull to one side.
Okay.
Your tires might wear down unevenly.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and you might even feel vibrations in the steering wheel.
So misalignment can affect handling, tire wear, and even comfort.
Exactly.
And what causes misalignment?
Lots of things. Hitting a curb, driving over potholes, even just normal wear and tear can throw things off.
So it's something you should be checking regularly.
Yeah, most mechanics recommend getting your alignment checked at least once a year, or even more often if you drive on rough roads a lot.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about wheel balancing? How is that different from alignment?
Wheel balancing is all about making sure the weight of the tire and wheel assembly is evenly distributed.
Okay, so it's about weight distribution.
Right. If one part of the assembly is heavier than another, it can cause vibrations, especially at higher speeds.
I can see how that would be annoying.
Yeah, it can also lead to premature tire wear
Hmm.
and even problems with your suspension.
So balancing is important for both comfort and safety.
Exactly.
And how do you balance a wheel?
They use a special machine that spins the wheel and measures the weight distribution.
Okay.
Then they add small weights to the rim to counteract any imbalances.
So it's like they're fine-tuning the weight to make sure everything spins smoothly.
Yep, pretty much.
All right, well, that's a lot to know about wheels and tires. It's fascinating how much goes into making sure everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, it's all about those little details.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more important topic we need to touch on:
What's that?
environmental responsibility.
Ah, yes, that's a big one.
Absolutely. We've talked about all the things that go into making and maintaining cars, but we can't ignore the impact that all of this has on the environment.
Yeah, it's something we all need to be thinking about.
So let's talk about that. What are some of the key environmental concerns when it comes to cars and automotive work?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is waste disposal. Automotive shops generate a lot of waste, including things like used oil, coolant, batteries, tires, scrap metal.
Right, and a lot of that stuff is hazardous, isn't it?
Yeah, some of it is, and if it's not disposed of properly, it can contaminate the soil and water.
So responsible waste management is crucial.
Absolutely. Our sources actually talk about some specific regulations in Puerto Rico, which shows that this is a global issue.
It's not just a local problem.
Nope, it affects everyone.
So what are some of the things that mechanics and shop owners can do to minimize their environmental impact?
Well, there are a lot of things, big and small. Using designated containers for different types of waste, recycling whatever they can, and following all the local regulations.
So it's about being informed and responsible then.
Exactly. And some shops are going even further. They're using water-based cleaners and paints. They're minimizing the use of solvents.
So it's about making conscious choices at every step of the process.
Yep, it all adds up.
It's great to hear that the industry is taking this seriously.
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Well, I think this is a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've gone from the history of cars to the inner workings of tires, from workshop safety to environmental responsibility. It's clear that automotive care and safety is a complex and multifaceted topic,
It really is.
and there's still more to explore.
Oh yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
So we'll be back soon with the second part of our deep dive, where we'll delve even deeper into the world of automotive care and safety. Stay tuned.
We'll see you then. So you know those tires we were just talking about? They're even more fascinating than you might think. Let's take a closer look at those materials that go into them.
Yeah, I'm ready to go deeper. I mean, we know it's rubber, but there must be more to it than that, right?
Oh yeah, way more to it. There are actually two main types of rubber: natural and synthetic.
Natural and synthetic. What's the difference?
So natural rubber, that's the stuff that comes straight from rubber trees.
Okay.
It's known for being super elastic and grippy, especially in the wet.
Oh, so that's important for traction, especially in rainy conditions.
Exactly. Back in the early days of cars,
Yeah.
grip was super important because the roads were often, well, pretty muddy.
Right, it makes sense that they'd use natural rubber for that.
Yeah. But synthetic rubber, that's a different story.
Okay, what's special about synthetic rubber?
Durability. It's much tougher than natural rubber.
Okay.
It can handle heat better, and it doesn't age as quickly.
So as cars got faster and more powerful, they needed a more durable tire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Synthetic rubber was the answer.
So it's all about finding the right balance between grip and durability, depending on the type of tire.
You got it. And tire manufacturers actually blend those two types of rubber together.
Okay.
And they add a bunch of other stuff to get just the right performance. Steel, nylon, rayon, silica, even carbon black.
Wait a minute. Carbon black, that's the soot stuff, right? What's that doing in tires?
Yep, the same stuff. It's a byproduct of petroleum combustion.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that there's soot in my tires.
Well, it's actually a key ingredient.
Okay.
It acts as a reinforcing agent, making the rubber stronger and more resistant to wear and tear.
Interesting.
And as a bonus, it's what gives tires their black color.
So it's not just for looks, it actually has a purpose.
Right. Pretty cool, huh?
All right, so we've got natural rubber, synthetic rubber, soot, all these other ingredients.
It's like a recipe.
How does it all get turned into an actual tire?
It's a whole process. But let's try to simplify it. It starts with the inner liner, which is a thin layer of rubber.
Okay.
And that's what keeps the air from leaking out.
Right, so that's what maintains the tire pressure.
Exactly. Then you've got multiple layers of fabric called plies.
Plies.
Yeah. Think of them as the backbone of the tire.
Yep.
They give it strength and flexibility.
So the plies are the structural foundation of the tire.
Precisely. And then on top of the plies, you've got the tread.
Okay, that's the part that actually makes contact with the road.
Right. And the pattern of the tread, that's what determines how the tire performs in different conditions.
Right, we talked about that earlier. Summer tires have those shallow grooves for dry pavement, and winter tires have deeper grooves for snow and ice.
You got it. It's all about maximizing grip and traction for different situations.
And then what about those steel belts? Where do they fit in?
Oh yeah, the steel belts, those are embedded within the tire, underneath the tread.
Okay.
They add another layer of strength and stability.
So it's like the tire has internal armor.
Exactly. And then the final step is vulcanization.
Vulcanization? What is that?
It's basically a heating process.
Okay.
They use heat to bond all those layers together and give the tire its final shape and strength.
It's kind of like baking a cake, in a way.
Sort of.
Yeah.
It's all about transforming those raw materials into a functional tire.
It's amazing how much technology goes into something that we often take for granted.
I know, right?
So we talked about the different types of tires. Summer tires, winter tires, all-season tires. Let's break that down a little bit more. What are the key differences between them?
The biggest difference is in the tread compound and the tread pattern.
Right. We talked about how the tread patterns are different.
Yeah. Summer tires have those shallower grooves for dry pavement.
Right, for maximum grip on those hot summer days.
Exactly. And winter tires have deeper grooves and sipes to bite into snow and ice.
Right, those tiny little slits that act like claws.
Yep, that's them. They're designed to keep you safe in those slippery winter conditions.
So it's like having specialized shoes for different seasons.
That's a great way to think about it.
And then there are all-season tires.
Yeah, those are kind of a compromise between summer and winter tires.
So good for places with mild winters, maybe.
Exactly. They're not as good as summer tires in the summer, and they're not as good as winter tires in the winter, but they're a good all-around option.
Right, so you don't have to change your tires every season.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that all-season tires aren't a replacement for dedicated winter tires if you live in an area with, heavy snow and ice.
Yeah, safety first.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned run-flat tires earlier. Those sound pretty cool.
They are pretty cool.
How do they actually work?
So run-flat tires are designed to let you keep driving even if you get a flat tire.
Wait, really? How is that even possible?
They have these reinforced sidewalls that are super strong.
Okay.
So even if the tire loses air pressure, those sidewalls can still support the weight of the car.
So you don't have to immediately pull over and change the tire?
Right. You can usually drive for another 50 miles or so at a reduced speed.
That's amazing. It's like a built-in safety feature.
Yeah, it could be really helpful if you get a flat in a dangerous situation.
Right, like if you're on a busy highway or late at night.
Exactly. But there are a few downsides to run-flat tires.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first of all, they tend to be more expensive than regular tires.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they can also give you a bit of a harsher ride because those sidewalls are so stiff
Right, that makes sense.
and they're not compatible with all vehicles either.
So you need to check if they'll work with your car.
Exactly.
Okay, so run flat tires are a cool option, but it's important to do your research before you get them.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to tire maintenance. One thing I hear a lot about is tire pressure. How often should you be checking that?
At least once a month.
Okay, once a month.
And more often if the weather's extreme, like really hot or really cold,
Okay. And what's the best way to check tire pressure?
you just need a tire pressure gauge.
Okay.
They're really easy to use and pretty inexpensive.
And how do you know what the correct tire pressure is for your car?
You can usually find it on a sticker inside the driver's side door jamb
Okay.
or in your owner's manual.
All right, so the information's easy to find. Why is it so important to have the correct tire pressure?
Well, if your tires are overinflated or underinflated, it can affect a lot of things. Your handling, your fuel efficiency, even how long your tires last.
So it's about safety, saving money, and getting the most out of your tires.
Exactly.
Now, what about tire rotation? I know you're supposed to do that, but I'm not really sure why.
Tire rotation is important because it helps make sure all four of your tires wear down evenly.
Okay.
The front tires usually wear down faster than the rear tires, especially on front-wheel drive cars.
Oh, right, because the front tires are doing most of the steering.
Exactly. So by rotating them, you're basically giving each tire a chance to be in all the different positions.
So it's like giving your tires a break.
Kind of.
And how often should you rotate your tires?
It depends on the car and the tires, but usually every 5,000 to 8,000 miles is a good rule of thumb.
Okay. And what about that tread wear indicator? What's that all about?
So the tread wear indicator is a little raised bar that's molded into the tread grooves of the tire.
Okay.
As the tire wears down, that bar becomes more and more visible.
I see.
And when the tread is level with that bar, it's time to replace your tires.
So it's like a built-in warning system telling you when your tires are getting too worn down.
Yep, pretty much. It's a simple but effective way to keep track of your tire wear.
Okay, so we've talked about tire types and tire maintenance, but let's face it, sometimes things happen. You hit a pothole, you run over a nail. How do you know if a tire is repairable or if you just need to get a new one?
That's a good question. There are a few things to consider. First, you got to identify the type of damage. Is it a puncture, a cut, a sidewall bulge, or tread separation?
Okay, let's break those down. What's a puncture?
A puncture is a small hole, usually caused by something sharp, like a nail or a piece of glass.
Yeah.
A cut is a larger tear, often from hitting a curb or a pothole.
Ouch. That sounds painful.
Yeah. Then there's a sidewall bulge.
Okay.
That's when the sidewall of the tire bulges out. It could be from hitting a curb or something else hard.
So that's a sign of structural damage.
Exactly. It means the tire's internal structure is compromised, and that can be dangerous.
Definitely don't want to mess around with that.
Nope. And then there's tread separation.
What's that?
That's when the tread, the part of the tire that touches the road, actually starts to separate from the rest of the tire.
Wow, that sounds really bad.
It is. It can cause you to lose control of the car, especially at high speeds.
So with all those different types of damage, how do you know if a tire is repairable or if it's time for a new one?
Our sources actually have some pretty specific guidelines.
Okay, what are they?
First of all, the damage has to be in the tread area, not the sidewall.
So sidewall damage is automatically a no-go.
Right. The hole also can't be bigger than 6 millimeters,
Okay.
and the tire can't have been repaired more than once.
So it's about location, size, and repair history.
Exactly.
And if the tire does meet those criteria, how do you repair it?
There are two main methods: cold patching and hot patching.
Okay, what's the difference?
A cold patch is basically a temporary fix. They plug the hole with a rubber compound.
Okay.
A hot patch is more permanent. They actually vulcanize a patch onto the tire's inner liner.
So it's like a mini tire surgery?
You could say that.
All right, well, that's a lot to know about tire damage and repair.
It's a whole world of its own.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about tires. But what about the wheels themselves? I've heard terms like wheel alignment and wheel balancing, but I'm not really sure what they mean.
All right, well, those are important aspects of car maintenance, too.
Okay, let's dive into the world of wheels.
So wheel alignment is all about adjusting the angles of your wheels to make sure they're properly positioned.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Each wheel has three main angles that need to be adjusted: camber, caster, and toe.
Camber, caster, and toe. I've heard those terms, but I don't really understand what they mean.
So camber is the inward or outward tilt of the tire when viewed from the front.
Okay.
Caster is the angle of the steering axis.
Okay.
And toe is the angle of the tires in relation to each other, whether they're pointing inwards or outwards.
Okay, so it's all about making sure the wheels are pointing in the right direction.
Exactly. And if they're not aligned properly, it can cause all sorts of problems. Your car might pull to one side,
Right, I've experienced that before.
your tires might wear down unevenly, and you might even feel vibrations in the steering wheel.
So misalignment can affect handling, tire wear, and even comfort.
Exactly. And it can be caused by lots of things.
Hmm.
Hitting curbs, driving over potholes, even just normal wear and tear can throw things off.
So it's something that should be checked regularly.
Absolutely. Most mechanics recommend getting your alignment checked at least once a year, or more often if you drive on rough roads a lot.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about wheel balancing? How is that different from alignment?
Wheel balancing is all about making sure the weight of the tire and wheel assembly is evenly distributed.
Okay, so it's about making sure the weight is balanced.
Exactly. If there's an imbalance, it can cause vibrations, especially at higher speeds.
I can imagine that would be pretty annoying.
Yeah, and it can also wear out your tires prematurely and even damage your suspension.
So balancing is important for both comfort and the longevity of your car.
Exactly.
And how do they actually balance a wheel?
They use a special machine that spins the wheel and measures where the weight is off balance.
All right.
And then they add small weights to the rim to counteract that imbalance.
So they're basically fine-tuning the weight distribution.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
All right, well, that's a lot of information about wheels and tires. It's amazing how much goes into making sure everything runs smoothly.
It's all about those little details.
Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, environmental responsibility.
Ah, yes, that's an important one.
Absolutely. We've talked about the manufacturing of cars and all the maintenance that goes into keeping them running, but we can't forget about the impact all of this has on the environment.
You're right. It's something we all need to be conscious of.
So let's talk about that. What are some of the key environmental concerns when it comes to cars and automotive work?
One of the biggest ones is waste disposal.
Okay.
Automotive shops generate a lot of waste. Used oil, coolant, batteries, tires, scrap metal.
Right. And a lot of that stuff is hazardous, isn't it?
Yeah, if it's not disposed of properly, it can contaminate the soil and water.
So responsible waste management is crucial.
Absolutely. Our sources actually talk about some specific regulations in Puerto Rico that deal with hazardous waste disposal.
So this is a global issue, not just a local one.
Exactly.
It affects everyone.
So what are some of the things that mechanics and shop owners can do to minimize their environmental impact?
Well, a lot of it comes down to following the regulations and best practices.
Things like using designated containers for different types of waste, recycling whatever they can.
So it's about being informed and responsible.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And some shops are going above and beyond, like using water-based cleaners and paints instead of solvents, and making sure their equipment is properly maintained to reduce emissions.
It's great that the industry is making an effort to be more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the inner workings of tires to the importance of wheel alignment and balancing, and of course, the environmental impact of all of this.
It's been quite a journey.
And we're not done yet. There's still more to explore in the world of automotive care and safety.
Oh yeah, we've got plenty more to talk about.
So stay tuned for the third and final part of our deep dive, where we'll delve even deeper into the human element of automotive work and the importance of ethical considerations.
We'll see you there.
You know, we've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of cars, so to speak.
Yeah, literally.
But let's not forget about the people involved, right? Like you said earlier, a mechanic's job is more than just fixing cars.
Oh, absolutely.
What did you mean by that?
It's about being a problem solver, and a trusted advisor.
Right.
People depend on mechanics to keep their cars safe and reliable, and that takes more than just technical know-how.
Yeah, it's about communication, trust.
Exactly. Think about it. When you take your car to a mechanic, you're putting a lot of faith in them.
Right.
Your safety, your money. You need to feel like you can trust them.
So it's about finding a mechanic who's not only skilled, but also honest and ethical.
Exactly. And speaking of ethics, we've talked about OSHA and workplace safety, but what are some of those specific regulations that mechanics need to be aware of?
Yeah, let's get into the details. What are some of the rules and guidelines that shops need to follow?
Well, OSHA covers a lot of ground, from hazard communication to PPE to fire safety. But for automotive shops, Some of the most important regulations have to do with hazardous materials.
Right, like those flammable liquids and asbestos dust we talked about.
Exactly. And it's not just about preventing accidents, but also about protecting workers from long-term health risks.
Right, so OSHA requires shops to have, like, training programs for employees on how to handle hazardous materials safely?
Yep. And they need proper ventilation systems to control fumes and dust.
So it's a multi-pronged approach: knowledge, training, and the right equipment.
Exactly. It's all about creating a safe and healthy work environment.
And what about personal protective equipment? What kind of PPE is typically required in a shop?
Well, the basics are safety glasses, gloves, and hearing protection.
Right, to protect your eyes, hands, and ears from all the hazards.
Exactly. And responsible shops will often go above and beyond the minimum OSHA requirements to make sure their employees are well protected.
That's great to hear. Now, we've talked about preventing accidents, but let's be realistic. Things happen. What about first aid? How important is that in the automotive environment?
First aid knowledge is super important in a shop because, well, accidents can happen, even with all the safety precautions in place.
So what are some common injuries that might occur, and what are the basic first aid steps?
Sprains, cuts, and burns are all pretty common in a shop.
Okay, let's start with sprains. What do you do for a sprain?
Rice, rest, ice, compression, and elevation.
Rice. Okay. Easy to remember.
Yeah, that's the first line of defense for a sprain. What about cuts?
Cuts, yeah. Those can happen pretty easily in a shop, too.
For minor cuts, just clean it with soap and water and put a bandage on it.
Okay.
But if it's a deep cut, you need to apply pressure to stop the bleeding and get medical help right away.
Right, because that could be serious.
Yeah. And then there are burns. Those can be really nasty, especially with hot engines and chemicals around.
So what do you do for a burn?
If it's a minor burn, cool it down with cool water right away.
Okay.
But for anything serious, cover it with a sterile dressing and get to a doctor.
So it's all about knowing the basics and being able to stabilize the situation until help arrives.
Exactly. But even for seemingly minor injuries, it's always a good idea to get checked out by a medical professional.
Right. Better safe than sorry. Now let's go back to environmental responsibility for a minute.
Okay.
We talked about waste management, but can you give us some more specific examples of how shops can minimize their impact on the environment?
Sure. One thing is using oil drain pans and absorbent pads to catch any spills.
Okay, so that the oil doesn't end up contaminating the ground.
Right. A lot of shops are also using oil recycling systems now.
Oh, that's cool. So they can actually reuse the oil?
Yeah, they filter it and clean it up so it can be used again.
That's a great way to reduce waste.
Yeah. And then there are things like properly disposing of used batteries.
Right, because those are hazardous. Right.
Exactly. They contain lead acid, which is definitely not something you want in the environment.
So how do you dispose of them properly?
Most shops have special collection containers for used batteries.
Okay.
And then they work with licensed recycling facilities to make sure they're handled safely.
What about tires? What happens to all those old tires?
You might be surprised to learn that tires are highly recyclable.
Really?
Yeah, they can be turned into all sorts of things, like playground surfaces, rubber mulch, even fuel.
Wow, I had no idea. So it's important to make sure your old tires are recycled properly.
Absolutely. It's all about reducing waste and finding ways to give those materials a second life.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into automotive care and safety. We started with the history of cars, explored the inner workings of tires and wheels, talked about workshop safety, first aid, environmental responsibility, and even the ethical considerations of the profession.
It's been a pretty comprehensive deep dive.
It really has. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is just how much goes into keeping cars running safely and efficiently.
Yeah, it's a lot more than most people realize.
And it's not just about the mechanics, it's about the car owners too, right?
Absolutely. We all have a role to play in keeping our cars in good shape and making responsible choices that protect the environment.
Well said. So to our listener, thanks for sending us all this great material.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
We hope you learned a lot from this deep dive, and we encourage you to keep exploring the world of automotive care and safety. Until next time, drive safe and stay informed.
See you next time.